Hi guys, I'm Stacy, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Florida Statute 491.0143, which is in regards to the practice of sex therapy. Florida Statute 491.0143 states that only a person licensed by this chapter who meets the qualifications set by the board may hold him or herself out as a sex therapist. The board shall define these qualifications by rule. In establishing these qualifications, the board may refer to the sexual disorder and sexual dysfunction sections of the most current edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association or other relevant publications. The licensing board for sex therapy is ASECT, the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. ASECT's Code of Ethics is a condition for membership. It applies to all members regardless of certification and membership status, and it embraces any activity that directly or indirectly relates to professional identity or training. While these ethical standards are not law, they are permissive and establish both aspirational standards and guidelines for professional practice. The purpose of the guidance of ASECT is to promote an observable code from which society and the consumers can derive expected behavior of the therapist. By setting forth these standards of ethical practice, ASECT assures that members will provide self-regulation and govern themselves with legal responsibility. ASECT's Code of Ethics was approved by their board on May 2004 and revised in June of 2008. The Code of Ethics contains 5 principles. The first is competence and integrity. The second is moral, ethical, and legal standards. The third refers to consumer welfare. The fourth, student, trainee, and other professional welfare. And the final area of their Code of Conduct refers to research subjects and their welfare. The first ethical principle refers to the following. A member shall accept responsibility for the consequences of his or her actions and make reasonable efforts to ensure that all professional services are appropriate and adequate for the consumer. The member shall also bear heavy social responsibility due to the manner of services that are provided and the vulnerability of the clients in which we see. In addition to this, they must maintain high standards of scholarship, and practice shall be accountable as an individual to the standards of the profession. Members shall also have training in sex education, counseling, therapy, and or supervision that is in accord with the standards created by ASECT and the laws relevant to the jurisdiction in which the member practices. In our case, it would be in the jurisdiction of the state of Florida. Also, under competency and integrity, a member shall also understand their limits of competence and shall communicate this to the client at the earliest possible time, and when the level of competence does not provide for proper services for the client, one shall refer out at the earliest convenience. Also, all consumers must be understanding of your competency level, your training, your affiliations, etc. You also have to express this in an honest and accurate manner. You must continue to participate in continuing education, and no member shall enter into association for professional practice or assist, aid, or promote in any manner any person who has been in violation of any law or who does not follow ASECT standards. You shall also verify the competency and integrity of any person to whom a consumer is referred. In addition to this, you shall not make any false report, record, or information, or induce another person to create a false record in your name. In addition to this, one shall not receive or provide any kind of monetary compensation for referring out a client. And last but not least, on this ethical standpoint, any member who becomes emotionally, physically, or otherwise impaired or disabled to a degree that it impacts the best interest of the consumer shall refer the consumer to another qualified and equally approved professional source. In regards to Principle 2, Moral, Ethical, and Legal Standards, ASECT starts off by saying that all members shall accept that the quality of their professional services are dependent upon personal morality and professional ethics and the ability to maintain legal standards. ASECT also determines that all Professionals need to be able to monitor the fact that your personal needs may influence your judgments, and that you need to have a qualified review source, such as a supervisor, to be available to assist in safeguarding against unwise or inappropriate judgments and acts. As with all forms of therapy, no member shall enter into any dual relationship regardless of the nature, and members shall avoid any action that might violate or diminish the legal and civil rights of the consumer. No member shall engage or condone practices that are inhumane or result in illegal or unjustifiable actions relevant to race, handicap, age, gender, sexual orientation, religion, or national origin. One shall only make factual, honest, and clearly stated public announcements or communications for advertising or promotional purposes. In addition to this, one shall not set forth identification with ASECT such as membership or certification status in an announcement, statement, or communication that also includes a college or university degree, unless that degree is based on academic merit and is from an appropriately accredited higher education institution. One must also act in accord with ASECT standards, guidelines related to education, counseling, therapy, supervision, and research. All members shall act in accord with the standards and guidelines for protection of consumers by other professional associations with which the member is affiliated and the laws of the jurisdiction in which the member provides their professional services, once again within the state of Florida. All members shall report any ethical, regulatory, or legal complaint or judgment relevant to their practice filed against them, with the report being submitted in writing within 30 days of the knowledge to the chair of the ASECT Ethics Committee. Principle 3 of ASECT's Code of Ethics refers to the welfare of the consumer. It states that the member shall accept that the consumer is in a unique position of vulnerability in respect to services related to sex education, counseling, therapy, research, and supervision, and shall constantly be mindful of the responsibility for protection of the consumer's welfare, rights, and best interests, and for the maintenance of the trust implicit in the educational, counseling, and therapeutic alliance. The member shall clarify from the onset of professional contact with the consumer the following items: professional training that the therapist has, the nature of services available to the consumer, the limits of the intervention's effectiveness, the personal values and professional preferences that are implicit with that therapist, and any exceptions to confidentiality and privileged communications, and any financial issues regarding the obligation of payment, etc. The member is also required to have some form of HIPAA policy in effect to keep all of the consumer information confidential. When it is necessary for a member to share the consumer's information, it can only be shared to an extent following the following circumstances. The consumer must provide written and informed consent, including the type of and the nature of the information to be released, the knowledge of the purpose for which the information will be used, designation of the source, that the consent is given voluntarily and with competency, and the name and date on which the consent is given, as well as when there is a clear and imminent danger of bodily harm to the life of the consumer or others. As a therapist, if you are going to be using your consumer's information, you must obtain written consent for any type of information that you are using from that consumer. A therapist must also maintain meaningful records relevant to the professional services provided, and contacts with the consumer shall have a secure system for the preservation of these records. They must be kept for a full record, retained intact for no less than 3 years after completion of the last date of professional services, and a full record of the summary of the record shall be maintained for no less than 12 additional years after that 3. So a total of 15 years you have to maintain this client's record. It is also the responsibility of the ASECT member to orient a minor consumer of the limits of confidentiality pertaining to parents' rights, and one must also seek consultation when supervision is needed for a case in which personal elements are bringing into the therapeutic relationship. As stated before in the general ethics, one shall not engage in any dual relationship with a client. ASECT defines a dual relationship occurring when a member is in a professional role with a person and at the same time is in another role with the same person, or in a relationship with a person closely related to or associated to the person whom the member has a professional relationship, and or enters into another relationship in the future with a person or person closely related to this consumer. In other words, if you are in a professional counseling relationship with a person, you can never be in an outside relationship with them. This is a very important one regarding sexuality. Any member practicing counseling or therapy shall not engage, attempt to engage, or offer to engage a consumer in sexual behavior, whether the consumer consents or not. Being that this is sex therapy, it's very likely that this could happen. Members do not engage in sexual misconduct with current consumers, nor do they engage in sexual intimacies with individuals they know to be close relatives, guardians, or significant others of the current consumer. The last bullet in this section says that a member shall terminate professional services to the consumer when it is reasonably evident or should be evident that the consumer is not obtaining benefits sufficient to justify continued intervention. The fourth principle refers to welfare of students, trainees, and others. The ASECT member shall respect the rights and dignity of students, trainees, and others, such as employees, and maintain high standards of scholarship and preserve academic freedom and responsibility. A summation of this section basically states that from the beginning of the therapeutic session and working time with these people, students, trainees, employees, etc., the therapist must provide a professional contact and explain their professional qualifications and competencies. They must also maintain high standards of scholarship. They must keep meaningful and systematic records of interaction. They must not coerce or require a student or trainee to be the subject of a research project. They shall not provide diagnostic therapeutic counseling during the supervisory relationship. And they shall not enter into any dual relationship, whether it be sexual or otherwise. The fifth and final principle of ASECT's Code of Ethics, it refers to the welfare of research subjects. It says that all ASECT members shall conduct his or her investigation with respect for the dignity, rights, and welfare of the subjects. Research must be ethical and legal at its inception and not justified solely by its intended or achieved outcome. Basically, that the member shall only be involved with research that is carried out by persons qualified to do the investigations, and that all of the research is relevant, and that the member shall only be involved in sex research that provides adequate protection to the human subjects at risk, and it must include voluntary informed consent and be in accord with applicable legal prescriptions or proscriptions. The member must also only be involved with research that protects the confidentiality of research data, and the member shall be involved only with research that requires all investigators to be honest and accurate in their findings. The member shall also only be involved with sex research that offers to provide an explanation of the purpose of the investigation, and the member will not engage in any type of sexual relationship or sexual misconduct with research subjects as defined above in Principle 3. Well, that concludes ASECT's Code of Ethics for sex therapy. This is what the state of Florida follows, being that they follow ASECT's code, which is the governing board. In addition to that, you also have to remember that you must follow all of the Florida codes of ethics as well. If you have any further questions about this, feel free to ask away.